Hi, I'm Ashley, and this is the corner of the internet where I talk about my knitting. I live in a small studio apartment with my boyfriend Angel and our two dogs Yaku and Chango. This past week I didn't get to too much knitting just because some of Angel's family from North Carolina came to visit, and so we decided to stay at an Airbnb, do some hiking. We went and saw some ice castles. It was a very cold weekend here in the West, and so I didn't get too much knitting done because we were running around doing stuff, and it was such a good time. But I do want to talk about the knitting that I was able to get completed. This is my September sweater so far. I was actually able to join in the round. So this is the front and the back. So I was able to join in the round last night. I actually left this project behind during my trip, but I was able to kind of work on it the last couple of days since we've been back. I am working on this with 2 strands of Nutidin along with 1 strand of Easier Alpaca 1 in the color gingerbread. One of the projects that I took along with me on my trip was the waffle loop sweater by Other Loops. And so I was able to start the front section. I finished the back panel. I have a few more rows of the front section before I start adding the cabled section for the front of the sweater, which I opted for. So I did a little bit of knitting on this on my trip, but since this is kind of a bigger project, I only knitted it in the cabin that we were staying at. And so I got a couple of rounds in, which was great. I am knitting this in the cone of alpaca, baby alpaca wool that my parents brought back for me from Peru, along with a strand of Easier Soft. I think it's just Easier Soft, the lace version. The project that I was able to work on the most during our trip, because it was a great in the car knit, I didn't have to pay too much attention to it, is the hat that I casted on for Angel. So as you know, one of my New Year goals for 2025 was to knit a hat for Angel with the Camellia Fiber Co. DK Yak. It's like a blend of, I believe, merino, silk, and yak wool. And I started the Pearl Soho's free pattern called the Classic Ribbed Hat. This is it so far. And so this was just such a great knit to just, start working on in the car when we were driving somewhere. I could hold conversations with family while they were visiting. It was just a very easy project to pick up and put down, unlike the waffle loop sweater, which requires more of my focus. And with the cone, it's not as portable. But this is great, and I'm loving the pattern. It's super easy, it's free, it's very popular, and I can see why. I mean, the 1x1 ribbing is super easy, and it looks nice, and I can see how it's going to stretch pretty easily because the ribbing gives a lot of, a stretchy fabric. So when it came to my spinning, of course, I didn't spin at all during my trip. I did not bring along my spinning wheel. But once I did get home, I was actually able to spin up a bobbin of the otter hip string wool that I have, and so I finished spinning about 150 grams of the fiber. And so tomorrow I'm just going to go ahead and ply them together. As you could tell, I think I got confused because I went ahead and I separated the 4 ounces that I had into, so I weighed them and I split it in half, so about 68 grams for each bobbin. I think I got confused at some point and I actually borrowed from one section of the portions that I separated, and so one of the bobbins seems to have more yarn than the other, but that shouldn't be a problem. I'll go ahead and ply whatever else together and just make it an equal skein. I was able to finally figure out my spinning wheel. I went ahead and researched a little bit on ratios and whirl sizes. A great resource is Jillian Eve here on YouTube. I will mention her below and I'll go ahead and link that video as well. But she is extremely well educated on spinning, fiber, all the spinning tools that you can think of, and she's very interested in the history of spinning as well. So it's a very educational YouTube channel. I think she is just extremely well spoken. She's very intelligent, and she does a really good job of sharing some really profound thoughts that she explores when it comes to consumption, fibers, and our historical and modern relationship to not only nature, but how we produce clothing, textiles, and other materials that helped us survive throughout the centuries. But after I watched some videos from her as well as others, I was able to figure out how to use my spinning wheel in a way that it would help me and not work against me like what was happening before. I was actually spinning at the largest whirl, which meant that it was spinning the slowest amount and with the least amount of spins. And I was trying to spin that type of yarn at, hopefully a DK. But in order for that to happen and for it to be that thin, which I was drafting the wool in a way that was thin, but I was actually working harder to try to create a gauge of wool that just wasn't going to be that size. So I ended up, hurting my elbow because I was working harder than I needed to. And I was able to finally figure out how to make my wheel help me. And I am extremely proud by how these bobbins turned out. It looks quite consistent, and it looks like I may be able to get at least a DK gauge or weight from this type of yarn. I went down in the size of my whirl and my wheel, and so that way it was spinning at a higher rate and it was spinning at a faster rate, which meant that I could spin a thinner thread. So I'm gonna go ahead and ply that tomorrow and see how it turns out, and I will share it with you on my next episode. And I'll go ahead and spin the rest of the wool that I have, which is the final 4 ounces or about 150 grams of the otter hip string wool that I have. So that concludes the talking portion of my video. That's all I have for you today, since I didn't do too much crafting this past week. Me and the family had such a great time. We were able to hike Garden of the Gods, which is a very beautiful national park here, not too far from where I live. The ice castles were really interesting. It happened to be the coldest weekend probably of this year, and so it was quite cold, but I mean, my Sophie hood kept me so warm with the alpaca content. I was also able to wear a shawl that I made from a 100% wool yarn as well, which just did great to keep my mouth and face warm, as well as my neck. And I took some footage of both of these events, and so I will have you watch that if you stick around. And I'll add some music so that we can craft together. Let's get crafting.